The late summer of 1940 marked a terrifying shift in the calculus of war. Adolf Hitler had failed to defeat the Royal Air Force in the skies over Britain. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of the island nation, was indefinitely postponed. A new, brutal strategy was conceived by the German High Command to force British capitulation. This plan was not aimed at soldiers or battleships, but at the very heart of the British civilian population. The psychological warfare would take the form of relentless, massed aerial bombardment, targeting the nation's morale. The German Luftwaffe, confident in its superior air power and battle-hardened crews, believed a sustained campaign of terror would break the British spirit. They reasoned that constant fear, destruction, and death raining down from the night sky would shatter the resolve of the ordinary man and woman. This widespread collapse in public order would force the government to sue for peace, securing the western flank for Hitler's future plans against the Soviet Union. The Blitz, a contracted German term meaning lightning war, was about to descend upon the cities of Great Britain, beginning with the capital, London. The initial phase of the Blitz, starting in early September, was a direct and focused attack on the docks and industrial centers of London. The intention was to cripple Britain's war production and its vital supply lines that relied on the massive port facilities along the River Thames. The German bomber crews flew with an almost casual confidence, fully expecting the British to quickly crack under the immense pressure of their coordinated raids. The vast scale of the operation required meticulous planning and deployment of hundreds of aircraft for multiple waves of attack, day after day. This initial confidence was rooted in the successful subjugation of other European nations that had quickly fallen to the coordinated assaults of the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe. The citizens of London, however, were about to demonstrate a profound and unexpected defiance that would expose the fundamental flaw in Hitler's brutal psychological strategy. Their quiet courage and fierce determination were an unknown quantity that the Axis powers had entirely failed to calculate into their military equation. Saturday, September 7th, 1940, stands as the official, brutal initiation of the Blitz. The day was clear, the weather perfect for the largest air armada yet assembled by the Luftwaffe. Close to 1,000 German aircraft, a mix of bombers and fighters, roared across the English Channel. Their primary target was the sprawling network of docks and warehouses that lined the River Thames in London's East End. The sheer noise of the approaching formation signaled a change from the earlier, more focused attacks on military installations. Around 4:43 p.m., the first wave of bombers descended, dropping a catastrophic payload of high explosives and incendiary devices. The area became a horrifying, unmanageable conflagration within minutes, as warehouses filled with everything from timber to rum became instant fuel. The Thames, far from being a barrier, appeared to boil with fire, reflecting the immense flames that licked hundreds of feet into the sky. A second, even heavier wave arrived after nightfall, guided not by navigational instruments, but by the colossal, unmistakable glow of the inferno already raging below. This was a deliberate and terrifying spectacle of destruction, meant to be seen for miles around and instill a city-wide panic. The densely populated working-class neighborhoods surrounding the docks bore the full, unyielding force of the attack. Thousands of homes were destroyed in that single night, creating instant, widespread homelessness and tragedy. The emergency services, the fire brigade, the police, and countless volunteers were overwhelmed by the unprecedented scale of the disaster. Londoners watched in stunned disbelief as their homes, their workplaces, and their landmarks were systematically reduced to ruin. The immediate aftermath was one of chaos, but beneath the fear, a hard core of resistance began to form almost instantly. This initial, massive assault was intended as a knockout blow, designed to paralyze the city's infrastructure and break the collective will of the population. It failed to achieve its strategic aim, instead forging a collective trauma that would galvanize the city's defense. The East End of London, now a landscape of smoking rubble, had unknowingly provided the stage for the true spirit of Britain to emerge from the ashes. When the air raid sirens wailed their chilling, familiar warning, the population of London sought refuge wherever they could find it. For hundreds of thousands, this sanctuary was found deep beneath the streets in the labyrinthine tunnels of the London Underground. The network of tube stations and rail lines quickly transformed from a transportation system into the largest, most vital public air raid shelter in the world. Initially, the British government resisted the idea of using the underground, fearing the disruption to transport and the risk of panic. The people, however, simply took matters into their own hands, arriving night after night with their blankets, thermoses, and meager supplies. They claimed their spots early, marking out personal territory on the concrete platforms and tracks with chalk and their personal belongings. The environment was cramped, damp, and often unbearably noisy, filled with the roar of passing trains and the distant thud of bombs above. Entire communities spontaneously formed within these subterranean spaces, complete with their own unwritten rules, internal economies, and elected platform captains. Doctors and nurses set up makeshift clinics, while mothers did their best to maintain a sense of routine and normalcy for their children. Children, despite the circumstances, adapted quickly, treating the shelter as a strange, endless, and slightly exciting slumber party. Educational lessons were often organized in the tunnels, ensuring the youngest generation did not completely lose their connection to school. Sleep was often fitful, broken by the shuddering impact of near misses and the constant, unnerving presence of massed humanity. Yet, a profound sense of shared adversity and camaraderie permeated the air, a feeling of we are all in this together. The tube became a symbol of London's refusal to concede, a visible sign that daily life, however severely disrupted, would continue. By morning, the city's subterranean inhabitants would emerge, collect their few belongings, and take the first trains back to the surface. They stepped out into the smoke, the debris, and the morning light, ready to face the destruction and rebuild what they could before the next siren sounded. The sound of the air raid siren, a rising and falling electronic wail, became the soundscape of wartime London. It was a terrifying, omnipresent call to action that dictated the rhythm of life for millions of civilians. This mechanical cry was the official warning that German aircraft were sighted and bombs were imminent. The initial moments of the alert were always a mix of adrenaline, fear, and a well-rehearsed, grim routine. People instantly dropped whatever they were doing, shopping, working, or simply having a cup of tea, and moved for cover. The dash to the nearest shelter, whether a well-built public space, a reinforced basement, or the small backyard Anderson shelter, was a daily, often nightly, scramble for survival. The all-clear siren, a long, continuous note, was the collective sigh of relief, the signal that the immediate danger had passed. However, the all-clear often revealed scenes of unimaginable devastation, where streets were unrecognizable and buildings had simply vanished. The psychological toll of this constant cycle of terror and destruction cannot be overstated. It was a form of mental torture. The unpredictable nature of the raids meant that no one was safe, and no location was entirely secure from a direct hit. Citizens learned to read the signs, to estimate the distance of the bomb falls by the sound of the anti-aircraft guns and the distant explosions. They became amateur experts in the sounds of war, able to distinguish the terrifying engine note of a German bomber from that of an RAF fighter. This was not a war fought on some distant front line. It was a war fought in the kitchen, in the bedroom, and on the local high street. The persistent nature of the threat demanded a level of psychological fortitude that the Luftwaffe had completely underestimated. They expected panic and a breakdown of public morale, but instead, they encountered a stubborn, almost bored acceptance of the danger. The necessity of simply going on with daily life, of making tea, reporting for work, and maintaining basic civility became an act of profound resistance. The siren, intended as a tool of terror, ultimately became a challenge, a signal for Londoners to once again prove their unyielding commitment to survival. The symbolic importance of the monarchy's decision to remain in London during the Blitz cannot be overstated. King George VI and Queen Elizabeth adamantly refused to leave the capital, despite repeated and logical suggestions that they relocate for their own safety. Their decision was a direct and public expression of solidarity with the suffering people of London and the nation as a whole. They deliberately chose to share the risk, rejecting the idea that they should be sheltered away from the terror their subjects endured. Buckingham Palace itself did not escape the attention of the Luftwaffe, suffering multiple direct hits that visibly damaged the royal residence. The Queen famously remarked, in response to the bombing of the palace, "I am glad we have been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." This statement instantly became a powerful piece of counterpropaganda and a major boost to public morale across the entire country. Following each major raid, the king and queen would quickly travel to the affected neighborhoods, often walking through dangerous, smoking rubble. They spoke with survivors, comforted the bereaved, and inspected the work of the emergency services with genuine, quiet concern. These visits were not merely ceremonial. They were highly visible demonstrations of a shared fate and an unbroken connection between the crown and the people. Photographs and newsreel footage of the royal couple in their simple, military-style uniforms touring bomb-shattered streets were reproduced around the world. This personal presence served as a potent symbol against the German narrative that the British leadership was isolated and indifferent to the people's suffering. By remaining visible and vulnerable, the royal family helped to cement the idea of a truly national effort, where hardship was shared from the lowest paid worker to the monarch. Their steady, calm demeanor in the face of incredible danger provided a vital source of inspiration, reinforcing the national mantra to keep calm and carry on. The example they set, of quiet duty and steadfastness, contributed immeasurably to the psychological defense of the nation. In the darkest hours of the Blitz, the nation found its voice and its unwavering backbone in Prime Minister Winston Churchill. His presence, his rhetoric, and his sheer force of will were arguably as important as any anti-aircraft battery in the defense of Britain. Churchill understood that the Blitz was a war of nerves, and he deployed language as his most powerful weapon. His famous radio broadcasts, delivered with a distinctive lisp and resonant gravitas, became national rallying cries that pierced the fear of the night. He did not shy away from the brutality of the situation, speaking plainly about the blood, toil, tears, and sweat that lay ahead. Yet, this honesty was always framed by an absolute, unshakable conviction in ultimate victory and the righteousness of the British cause. He famously spent many of the most intense raids observing the attacks from the roof of the Ministry of Supply or the Cabinet war rooms. His physical proximity to the danger was a matter of both personal bravado and a calculated leadership strategy. Like the royal family, his visibility during and after the worst raids provided instant, palpable reassurance to the people of London. He toured the damaged areas, often with a cigar clamped firmly between his teeth, exchanging a word or a nod with the rescue workers and the survivors. His bulldog-like demeanor perfectly embodied the stubborn, defiant spirit that Londoners were finding within themselves. The underground cabinet war rooms, where Churchill spent much of the war, became the nerve center of the resistance, a subterranean symbol of unbowed governance. From this fortified bunker, he directed the war effort, ensuring that the necessary resources were constantly deployed to maintain civil order and continue the war effort. Churchill's speeches transformed the German attempt to terrorize London into a heroic, epic defense against tyranny. He successfully reframed the suffering of the Blitz not as a sign of weakness, but as a demonstration of a unique, unyielding national strength. The spectacle of a burning London was intended to be the ultimate psychological weapon of the Luftwaffe. Hitler believed that the destruction of the city's historic and symbolic architecture would deliver a mortal blow to British pride and history. Yet, the towering flames and widespread ruin had a profoundly opposite effect on the civilian population. The iconic site of St. Paul's Cathedral standing undamaged amidst the surrounding, leveled devastation became the most powerful visual of the entire Blitz. This image, captured by Herbert Mason for the Daily Mail, showed the dome rising above the smoke and fire, a beacon of hope and an embodiment of divine protection. The survival of St. Paul's, often called the People's Church, was instantly interpreted as a symbol of Britain's own unvanquished spirit. The ruins of other historic buildings, like the medieval churches in the City of London, were cleared but not forgotten. The very destruction of the shared environment created an intense, collective ownership of the tragedy and a unified desire for vengeance. The Londoners' response was not to flee or to despair, but to immediately begin the laborious process of clearing, cleaning, and continuing. The phrase business as usual became a darkly ironic, yet deeply felt, expression of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Shopkeepers would put up hand-painted signs on the remnants of their premises that read, "Open as usual," even if only one wall remained standing. Children continued to go to school, albeit in often improvised and damaged classrooms, maintaining a precious sense of continuity. The determination to get back to work and maintain the daily functions of a massive city was a strategic victory in itself. The Luftwaffe could drop bombs, but they could not destroy the deep, cultural infrastructure of a metropolitan society. The fires may have raged, consuming irreplaceable parts of the city's heritage, but they failed to ignite the expected flame of surrender in the hearts of the people. The most critical factor in London's survival during the Blitz was the bravery and dedication of its ordinary citizens, the unsung heroes of the home front. The Air Raid Precautions, or ARP, service was a vast network of volunteers composed of air raid wardens, fire watchers, and first aid responders. These individuals, many of whom were too old for active military service or in reserved occupations, placed themselves in extreme danger every single night. The ARP warden's primary duty was to ensure the blackout was rigidly enforced, a frustrating but vital task to deny German pilots visual targets. They were also the first on the scene after a bomb fell, responsible for digging out survivors, tending to the wounded, and reporting the extent of the damage. The fire guard was another essential volunteer service, often comprising elderly men and women equipped with little more than a bucket of sand and a stirrup pump. Their courageous efforts, often climbing onto rooftops during raids, were crucial in tackling the numerous small incendiary fires before they could merge into unstoppable conflagrations. The Women's Voluntary Service, WVS, played an equally vital role, providing comfort, hot food, and clothing to those who had lost everything. They ran rest centers and mobile canteens, ensuring that the newly homeless and the exhausted rescue workers were fed and cared for. Doctors and nurses worked around the clock in hospitals that were themselves frequently targeted, performing surgery under emergency conditions by flashlight. The railway workers, gas engineers, and utility repair crews toiled tirelessly to restore essential services immediately following a raid. Their quick action in repairing damaged infrastructure ensured that the city, though battered, never entirely ceased to function. This enormous, collective effort demonstrated a society that, when pushed to its limits, did not break into selfish panic, but rather coalesced into an efficient, compassionate machine of resilience. Propaganda played a critical and sophisticated role in maintaining the morale and unity of the British home front during the Blitz. The Ministry of Information worked tirelessly to shape the public narrative, emphasizing resilience, defiance, and the barbarity of the German attacks. Iconic, striking posters with simple, clear messages were plastered across the city, aiming to inspire a sense of duty and shared purpose. The most famous of these, though seldom actually used at the time, was "Keep Calm and Carry On," perfectly embodying the desired national attitude. Official newsreels, shown in cinemas before the main feature, carefully balanced the honest portrayal of destruction with triumphant stories of heroism and survival. They highlighted the tireless efforts of the emergency services and the calm resolve of the civilian population, emphasizing the collective refusal to panic. German propaganda, which attempted to sow discord and panic through radio broadcasts and leaflets, was largely ineffective and often treated with contemptuous humor by Londoners. Lord Haw-Haw, the German radio propagandist, became a figure of ridicule rather than fear, his reports providing the butt of many wartime jokes. The government successfully used the shared experience of the bombing as a national unifying force, presenting the war as a moral struggle of democracy against tyranny. The official messaging constantly reinforced the idea that the civilian effort was as critical to victory as the fighting on the distant battlefields. The constant repetition of themes like "London can take it" and "Britain stronger than ever" created a self-fulfilling prophecy of national endurance. By controlling the flow of information and focusing on the positive, communal aspects of the struggle, the government prevented the descent into widespread panic. The success of the Blitz propaganda lay in its resonance with the actual, lived experience of the people who were indeed carrying on and refusing to be broken. The safety of Britain's children became an immediate and overwhelming national priority upon the outbreak of war. Operation Pied Piper, the mass evacuation scheme, began in earnest in the late summer of 1939, moving millions of children from urban centers to the relative safety of the countryside. During the Blitz, this evacuation program was intensified as parents faced the horrifying reality of their children being endangered by the nightly raids. Children from working-class London neighborhoods were placed on trains and sent to live with host families in rural areas, an often traumatic separation for all involved. The experience was a profound cultural shock, bridging the vast social and economic divides between the city poor and the rural gentry. Many city children encountered running water and indoor toilets for the very first time in the country homes of their hosts. Host families, in turn, often found themselves confronted with the unfamiliar habits and dialects of the city children. Despite the inherent difficulties, the evacuation was a logistical success and a powerful example of the nation's commitment to its youngest generation. For the children who remained in London, life was a strange mix of terror and excitement, living their formative years in underground shelters and amidst ruins. They quickly adapted to the rhythm of the raids, becoming surprisingly resilient and knowledgeable about the different types of bombs and anti-aircraft fire. Schools that remained open often improvised, moving lessons to basements or specially constructed air raid shelters. The presence of the children who stayed behind, their innocence juxtaposed with the city's destruction, served as a constant reminder of what the adults were fighting for. The sight of a child playing in the rubble, or a group of them being led to a shelter, was a powerful visual testament to the continuation of life. The entire experience of the Blitz indelibly shaped the wartime generation, instilling in them a lifelong memory of loss, resilience, and extraordinary community spirit. The German strategy behind the Blitz was rooted in a fundamental and fatal misreading of the British national character. They believed the British were a soft, decadent, and easily intimidated people who would quickly surrender under intense, sustained pressure. The core objective, to break civilian morale and cripple industrial production, ultimately failed on both counts. While the destruction was catastrophic, the death toll, though immense, never reached the point that would cause a total collapse of public services. The raids were relentless, but they were also strategically inconsistent, often shifting targets between the docks, residential areas, and military sites. This lack of focus allowed key industries to recover quickly or to relocate production to less bombed areas of the country. The destruction of homes merely strengthened the resolve of the survivors, who saw the attacks as indiscriminate acts of terror against their families. The dispersal of the working-class population to the tube shelters and the countryside also complicated the desired crippling of the workforce. Instead of panic, the attacks fostered a deeply rooted sense of national solidarity that transcended class lines and regional differences. The constant danger forced people to rely on their neighbors and their community, strengthening the very social fabric the Germans intended to tear apart. The Luftwaffe's shift from military targets to civilian ones, ironically, reduced the pressure on the Royal Air Force, allowing it to regroup and prepare for future engagements. By spring 1941, the German High Command was forced to admit that the strategy had not worked and that Britain would not be bombed into submission. The majority of the German bomber fleet was eventually redeployed to the Eastern Front for the planned invasion of the Soviet Union. The failure of the Blitz proved that the courage and tenacity of a civilian population could be an active, effective defense against the most powerful air force in the world. The Blitz formally ended in May 1941, but its psychological and physical legacy in London endured for decades. Over 43,000 civilians were killed, and more than 1.4 million people were made temporarily homeless by the relentless bombings. The immense scale of the destruction forced a complete rethinking of urban planning, leading to the post-war rebuilding of large sections of the capital. The scars of the Blitz remain visible in London today, marked by abrupt changes in architecture where modern buildings stand next to pre-war structures. Small, unassuming gardens and parks across the city, known as bomb sites or bombed-out churches, stand as quiet memorials to the devastation. The spirit of Blitz resilience became a permanent, defining characteristic of the British national identity. It is an historical reference point for a time when the nation faced existential threat and met it not with surrender, but with stoic, collective endurance. The social solidarity forged in the underground shelters and on the rubble-strewn streets fundamentally altered class relations and accelerated social change. The memory of the shared experience helped to fuel the national determination to create a more equitable society after the war. The lessons learned during the period of rapid mobilization, civil defense, and community self-reliance were codified for future national emergencies. The failure of the Luftwaffe to break London's will remains one of the great moral and strategic victories of World War II. It stands as a testament to the fact that brute military power cannot always conquer the deep, unyielding spirit of a free people. The story of the Blitz is not merely one of destruction. It is, above all, a timeless narrative of human courage and the unbreakable spirit of a city that refused to bend.